I hope you all have been enjoying the virtual summit so far. This is the last session of the day, and we're excited to have you all joining this discussion about EU MDR. Just a quick few housekeeping items. The session is recorded, so you'll be able to access the content and the recording after, as well as the slides that are shared if there are any. For those of you who would like proof of your attendance, as a professional development, you can request an attendance certificate through the Greenlight Guru Academy, and you can find those instructions on the Virtual Summit website or in the follow-up email that we will send. So this session will run for about 45 minutes. If any questions come up during this webinar, please ask in the chat on the right-hand side, and we will get to as many as possible. So just a quick overview of this panel is the timelines for MDR being shifted and pushed back. It's hard to keep up, but how do you know if your internal departments are on pace? We've got some information concerning these topics. So if you can tune in for an enlightening conversation as some MDR experts discuss the key strategies you need to nail down your MDR plan. So with that, we'll start off with just some introductions from everyone on the panel. If you'd like to please tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and your current company and role. Then Lori, if you want to start us off, I'll just go in the order who's on my screen.
Yeah, absolutely, no problem. So I'm Lori Rowe. I am the director and founder of Red MedTech. Red MedTech is a technical, regulatory and quality consultancy, and we specialise in medical devices and healthcare technology projects. My background's in engineering, design and innovation, and I've worked in development and manufacturing for like over 20 years. And basically Red MedTech help medical device designers and manufacturers by providing practical QRA and design for compliance support. And I'm also a visiting professor at the Engineering and Design Institute London.
Awesome, thanks Lori. All right, Michael, looks like you're up next.
Yeah, hey, my name is Michael Colicker. I'm the CEO and founder from Regulatory Globe, and also the co-founder from MedTech. So my background is engineering, first in the aircraft industry, and then later on I switched to the medical device industry. And there I started with the regulatory affairs. So I have a lot of knowledge in the regulatory affairs space. And what we do at Regulatory Globe is we provide helpful tools for MDR implementation, IVDR implementation, also for MDSUP. So that's the main part there. And on the MedTech side, we have mainly the authorized representative for the EU, Switzerland, and also UK.
Awesome. Adnan, you'd like to go next?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so hello everyone. My name's Adnan Ashfaq, and I'm the director founder of Simply Medica. Used to be FamiMed, but I've renamed the business to Simply. I am in the medical devices sector for 23 years. So I've been around in a few things. I worked for all sorts of small, medium stuff with validation. So I was heavily involved in a lot of process validation for the first 10 years of my career in medical devices, and then moved more into quality and regulatory, which I've been supporting a lot of startup companies over the last 10 years or so. A lot in the sector of digital health. So there's a Hello? Can you still hear me?
Okay, yeah. Yes, we can now, yes.
I think there's a loss of connection there. Apologies for that. Yeah, so I was just saying, so just on my career path, I've moved into the quality regulatory space and been assisting with a lot of companies, and MDR and IVDR it's just all over the place. Big questions, I know, and lots of challenges. So look forward to the rest of this session.
Awesome. All right, and lastly, we have Craig.
Yeah, so I've been involved since 1992 in data and barcoding. Got involved in healthcare through something called Care Magic, specifically breast implants. I live in France, and I was amazed at 400,000 women across the globe, and there was no register. So I focused my company's efforts on traceability, safety, and liability, and that's what I do.
Awesome.
So I basically, what my experts do is go into a company and say, what do you need to do, and give them the tools that they need. We deal with data, traceability, no, to a lesser extent barcoding, because that's expertise. But it's the traceability of the data down to the end user, which caused me to get involved with this.
Awesome. Sounds great. All right. Thanks everybody for those introductions and giving us a little more information on your background and where you come from. So let's just get started with a pretty broad question. Can you provide us a status update on EU MDR? I know there's a lot of different moving parts right now, but just a general status update, you know, if there are any important deadlines coming up, what's changed, anything of that nature.
If I can comment on that. Okay. So the core data is not going to change. We have problems between MDD and MDR in relation to basic UDI allocation. Yes. Which we've got clients who are moving also from HIBIC to GS1. And it's we've got we need to reference the medical device coordination group. There are a lot of anomalies at the moment in the MDR, and also the EU UDI help desk. So not everything's etched in stone, but the core data set is pretty much etched in stone. And we have companies, sorry, we all have companies from different areas, manufacturers, liabilities, and our core feel is that the data set, getting that together, the data set and the labeling is the core to getting certification from MDD to MDR. I don't know if you all agree with me, but that's what we're seeing at the moment.
So, does anyone else have anything they'd like to elaborate that they've seen from their end?
Yeah, I mean, I think statistics go a long way, and everybody likes to look at statistics. And I know there's been some interesting surveys that have been done recently, and I think there was an interesting debate that happened recently in May, June, with the whole regards to certification and the bottleneck that we've got with notified bodies. Now, there's a lot of finger pointing that's been happening within the industry, with industry pointing towards notified bodies and EU Commission, and the EU Commission going back to companies saying, well, you've actually had long enough to sort this out. The MDCG guidance documents are fantastic. I wouldn't say that they're all there. There's probably a lot to come back in. There's a lot of MDCG guidance documents still needed. There's lots of questions. One of the things, of course, is that we went from a 60-page document to about a 160-page document, and that's riddled with more and more questions than answers. And the trouble with that is that you've got more these guidance documents, and sometimes the guidance documents clear things up, but sometimes they cause more problems. And this is exactly where you need to have the backhand of some support of consultants that have been around in industry and spoken to notified bodies to see really what's happening on the field within the industry, because it's all very theoretical when we look at just the IVDR as a piece of legislation, and legislation can be very, very complex to try to interpret, and people make mistakes from that. So we've got interesting statistics. I've got a figure here of over 13,000 legacy product certificates, which are due to expire in 2024. We're only 2 years away from that. And when we've got only 30 notified bodies designated, and the capacity of those notified bodies apparently is something like 6,300 certificates annually to certify against the MDR and the IVDR. So we've got two situations going on here, not just with the MDR, but also with the IVDR. And it's causing an absolute nightmare where the companies have had to try and look at rationalization of their product portfolio. It's the shortages of medical devices within industry, within hospitals, for patients, etc. So there is a huge debate that's taking place. So I would say, I mean, from the message earlier on about barcoding and a UDI, etc. Definitely that's a challenge, but there's a much broader challenge that's taking place here, and that's getting capacity from notified bodies.
Can I ask you a question? Yeah. Product recalls, adverse events. So event reporting at the moment is changing from MDD to MDR. My understanding is at the moment the allocation of basic UDI is down to UDMED for that. But then we've raised a question with UDMED is how do we transfer that to from MDD to MDR? And we haven't had a satisfactory response so far.
Does anyone have any anecdotes or experience on how they've handled that?
Yeah, well, the dates for UDMED have sort of, they've been kicked out somewhat a few times now. And to sort of, if I sort of jump back and sort of frame it for anybody that's joining this call and they're brand new for an MDR perspective and they've maybe not dealt with it before, if I perhaps recap on some of the key dates, and then we can understand how UDMED sort of fits or doesn't fit in with that. So the MDR entry into force was 25th May 2017. We had 3 years transition period. So the original date of application was 26th May 2020 with a 4-year grace period. So those directive certificates, obviously they wouldn't exceed 5 years from date of issue, but the MDR rules that all certificates are void at the latest 26th of May 2024. Due to the COVID pandemic happening, those dates were reviewed and quite a few things are in a state of flux as things have been rolled out and evolving. So because of COVID, we had the amending regulation that kicked everything out by a year. So the date of application then for the MDR was 26th of May last year. So by now we would hope that people have been, preparing for this from a development and manufacturing point of view. But as Craig rightly said, some of those dates haven't changed. So we have Article 113, that's not changed, and Article 34, which is UDMED. So, they basically, I think if we're going to, have we got the opportunity to share the slides from the EU? Or perhaps provide that as a handout?
Yeah, if you want to provide that as a handout later, I think that would be great.
Yeah, so essentially there's the 3 sort of modules at the front end of UDMED. They're all active. So the ACT registration, that was live since December 2020. UDI, that's been around since October 21, and notified body and certificates, that's been around since October 21 on the whole. The other missing sort of components to that, we're looking at now like 2024. So the sort of minimum viable product, as it were, for UDMED is estimated to be done by the end of Q4 2023, so that the audit of that can happen at the beginning of early 2024. And if that target's hit, then the medical device coordination group review the audits. That can happen then later in Q2. So yeah, it's what, 6 years after it was originally targeted to be out there, that these things are just they're taking a little bit longer to sort of percolate through and evolve. Yeah.
2 questions. What about distance sales and implant cards? Implant cards, because it's supposed to require the date and the time of the operation. And I know that's ongoing with the MDCG, because it's impossible for a manufacturer to know the date and time of the operation. But also, what's your thoughts on this thing about distance sales?
I'm not exactly sure. What does the question actually mean itself? I mean, does that mean?
Well, distance sales could be you buy a medical product via Amazon, for Christ's sake. and there's a specific documentation about it. And I'm just raising the question because I've reviewed all the documentation, and I can't find an answer as to how they're going to regulate distance sales.
Okay.
However, equally, I mean, I would say that the distance sales manufacturers' obligations aren't any different for distance sales or non-distance sales. You know, you've still got to have a declaration of conformity drawn up towards all of the requirements that are needed and the obligations of the manufacturer, or if you are an importer or distributor, and if you're selling on one of these platforms, your obligations are still there. And those have all been quite clearly laid out. And there's a lot of guidance documents. The only thing that I would say, I mean, this whole finger pointing of who's to blame, is the industry taking their time, recognizing that there's work to be done, or is it the EU Commission? My own point of view is, yes, I feel it's mixed. However, I would say to any manufacturers listening into this, don't try and point the finger towards the regulations and the Commission, because there's enough information out there for you to get started, and there have been for absolutely years.
Yeah.
And when you come across that roadblock, fair enough, you come across it. But for anyone that's not started it, fair enough if people have got specific questions. And that's what we're here for. That's what we're all trying to find out within the conundrum, because we're all trying to ask the questions. And some people have got more experience than others where they've had similar situations or those specifics. And the medical device industry is a very complex industry. We've got a multitude of different permutations that we need to try and deal with. It's not a single one pony trick. You know, we've got to go through all different hoops and different questions of different possibilities. And some of the panelists here and other people even listening in might have experience from that. So, Laurie, I don't know if you've got anything that you want to add in there.
No, I mean, yeah, you're absolutely right. So to answer your question, Craig, sort of distance selling, you can't say, yeah, I've purchased this via an XYZ online retailer, and therefore I'm going to, we're going to justify that as a rationale for excluding, you know, compliance to the regulations, and my design doesn't need to meet the specifications and the test criteria, etc., say of specific product standards or harmonized standards, simply by virtue of buying it via the internet. It's, if in a nutshell, if that product is going to be used in that marketplace, then it needs to comply with the regulations that are associated with that jurisdiction. I think it's probably fair to say that's applicable worldwide, not just for the EU MDR. And yeah, I agree totally with what you're saying, Adnan. We had like a 4-year grace period. There was lots of publications and consultations ahead of the MDR entrance force since 2017. You know, we're now 2022. And granted, yeah, some people will find themselves like, maybe it's a new market. They've not necessarily gone into the EU, and maybe all their previous experience was just with medical device directive. Yeah. And now it's like, oh, wow, I've got to compile, you know, this is a huge document, and it might seem intimidating, but with the right partners and the right expertise for your device type, classification, and technologies, you know, you then can identify and select a partner to work with to help guide you through this and compliance pathway, essentially.
Yeah, I've just noticed somebody put up a question there about a startup, and I deal with a lot of startups. I'm sure some of you guys do as well. And this conversation is not just about MDR transition for those that are going from the MDD to the MDR, but what about those who are trying to launch a new device? And I know one of the questions here was also about innovation, about new products. And I have to be very, very honest, and this is very sad, and I really feel quite strongly about this. Innovation has absolutely been stifled by the MDR, because guys like this cannot get the devices out. They can't get a notified body to give them time of day because they're busy making the transition for the existing customers. And that is their priority, to try and do that. But and that's where there's the other argument of the notified body capacity, where there isn't enough capacity to try and deal with these new devices to get them out in the market. And it's unfortunate. So I'll wholeheartedly, I feel for companies like that. However, it's not a complete a black and white that there is no way that you can get your device into the market. You absolutely can, but you just have to keep trying. And sometimes it can also be down to contacts that you have within the organizations with notified bodies, and sometimes if people know who to speak to, and it shouldn't be like that, but unfortunately there is some bureaucracy there.
I've had information that the notified bodies, to some extent, are saying, right, if you don't have your data set in place and you don't have your labeling in place, in addition to all the other information you need, they'll just drop you to the bottom of the pile. Now that's, I have no proof of that, right? But speaking to people, they're just saying, look, if we come to you, you come to us and we say, we want you to certify. If you don't have all this information, just come back in 6 weeks, 8 weeks time, 2 months time.
Yeah, but in the end, sorry. So, but in the end, this is really important that you get in touch with your notified body. Make sure that you interact with them so that he knows, okay, you are in progress and you make everything which is possible to be compliant with the MDR. You have a strategy in place that you be done by 2023, that you have all the documentation in place and whatever is possible at a certain time with a certain information you have. And there you start to increase that you be allowed to get an extension of your certificates, for example. So it's really important that you always be in touch with your notified body and just keep up the work with the MDR. There's no backwards.
Yeah,
exactly.
Agreed. Yeah. The other thing that I would just want to throw in there also is that people are obviously asking the question now, if they cannot get their device certified into the EU market, what do they do? It doesn't have to be a showstopper. So there's two other things that I would say. That the UK market, now that's another thing, the UK CE marking, there's another whole layer of complications involved in that. However, it's slightly easier because the UK MDR is actually the old MDD that's being utilized within the UK market. So those devices that could possibly go through the UK CE mark could be an easier approach. However, it's not quite so clear as that, because however, there's only 2 notified bodies at the moment, and there's a third one that I know that's working on it, that hopefully should be by the end of the year designated. So hopefully by the end of this year, we should have 3 that I know of, and others may know other ones. And then the US market is the other option. And I know lots of my clients have been going that way, where they want to launch a device into the market. They're looking towards the UK market and then the US market. With the US market, nothing has really changed as much as it has within the UK and the EU market because of post-Brexit. What we've ended up with is the UK CE and notified body is still a bottleneck, and with the MDR, it's still a bottleneck. So we have to have a look at other options. And there's also some advantage in that. I mean, if you can get your device into any of these markets, any of the post-clinical information that you can gain from that could be utilized in any of the other applications. So there is cross-functional utilization of data that you can use once you've got your device through verification and validation, preclinical data, which is going to be needed for the MDR regardless. And if you can get that off the ground, then just do it. If we look towards the requirements for FDA within the UK market and the EU market, which are the 3 biggest markets in the world, I'm not arguing within specific areas within Europe, but because UK is not in Europe anymore, it's one of the bigger markets. So therefore, it's in the interest of manufacturers to try and get a technical dossier sorted out as soon as possible. And there's a big overlap between all 3 markets.
Yeah, can I just raise 2 final points in the time we've got left? We're seeing a lot of our existing customers who were using HIBIC in the US now transitioning to GS1. So they had GS1 as a secondary identifier in the US. So there's a lot of decommissioning old records and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But my premier point is, if you have a product recall or an adverse event reporting in the EU, exactly when and what the manufacturers need to do. My understanding is that they have to have the information, the data points available at the same time as they report such an incident. Is that correct?
So there should have already. Are you asking specifically, say, field safety corrective notices, like what, or just the fact that they should have a process in place? I'm trying to understand your question, because most manufacturers would typically have, as part of their risk management process and their vision systems, a mechanism for reporting.
No, the process is in place, but as part of that, as I understand it, they have to provide, for example, if I was selling false breasts in Europe, which had a product recall or an adverse event, I'm supposed to submit a process, but also provide the relevant data as part of that process. I just wanted to confirm whether you agree that's what they should be ready to do. Because most of our clients have the data, but is it ready in the form that the EU now demands? So, for example, you're my authorized rep, and I said, look, we've had a problem with this product. It's this batch. And put in place this documentation. Yes. So you do all of that, but as part of that, the EU is now demanding that you have the product data available to submit as part of this overall report.
Which you would have with adequate traceability processes, correct?
That's my question.
Ah, right. Okay. I see. Yeah. So that sounds like you've got, this is a project specific question that you need some consulting on.
I think that, yeah, absolutely. I think last year there was about 4,000 or 5,000 product recalls, adverse events reporting. Don't EU figures, don't quote me on the exact amount. But now I think as part of this EU or MDR transition, they're expecting that as a manufacturer, not the importer, you will have this data ready and available to give them as part of the overall documentation set they require for any kind of recall adverse event reporting. Ladies, gents, correct me if I'm wrong, but I've done a lot of reading on this, and it seems to be a bit of a sea change. Whereas before, like with the PIP, 400,000 women across the globe, no one knew where they were. What have been implanted now, if tomorrow we have a client that does an adverse event or a product recall, they're requiring a lot more data as part of that NB QMS reporting. Does anyone have any experience with adverse events reporting?
I'm not sure, Craig, if are you referring to, is that from the MDR that you're referring to, or specifically from ISO 13485?
I don't know. It's not my area of expertise, to be frank.
I mean, from my perspective, I would expect the manufacturers to have their adverse reporting in line with the MDR requirements, but being driven by the QMS, because your QMS requires you to have a procedure which records your adverse events and post-market surveillance as part of your post-market surveillance. So systems should definitely be in place, which is part of your ISO 13485 QMS, but it's enhanced by the MDR by the requirements which have been replaced by the MedDev 2.12 revision 8, which was it's putting tighter timelines on the reporting to the regulatory authorities, where previously you had 30 days for some serious public threats. Now it's 15 days that you've got, so it's reduced by the MDR. But that's something that the QMS needs to be updated for, to make sure that it's in line with the requirements of the MDR.
But you need to have the data set in order to report it to UDMED.
Should have been having that anyway, as part of like that. Those traceability requirements have been kicking around for some time. You know, I think even from working in orthopedic implants back in God knows when, a long while ago,
Okay.
it was like a standard part. You know, it's these they're not new, so they're different, but it's not things like traceability for implants and indelible markings, etc. They're not new. They might have been altered with an increased emphasis, but it's not different data.
So if I had an adverse event tomorrow, which I hopefully I wouldn't, but if I did, yes, and I said to my AR, oh, we've had a adverse event here. There would be a process of documentation which already exists and has existed for ages. Yes, but now what they're saying is we need to publish, if we haven't already, information to UDMED to say these products are subject to an adverse event. So therefore, I need to have that data in place in order to do that. I read something the other day that said the data should be submitted on the same day as I report the adverse event. Now, I have no proof of that at all, but that's what I've been reading.
So what I think the point here is, in the end, UDMED hasn't opened all modules right now. So it means currently it's not possible to go to the UDMED with this kind of information. So you have to do that in a traditional way as you have that before under the MDD.
Awesome. So,
okay.
Sorry, go ahead, Craig. So switching gears just a little bit here, I know that we have kind of alluded to the changes from MDD to MDR. What are some of the changes that have made the biggest impact, and what type of obstacles that are common that companies can face that could potentially delay a submission?
Well, but behind me here, I've got a banner, right, which basically outlines all of those things. Now it's funny because I had that made in 2017, and here we are in 2022, and it's a bit of irony that at the top it says the new MDR. Is it still the new MDR, or is it the EU MDR? But it's old, but it's still very new for a lot of people. So some of these things here that have been indicated. Clinical evidence was always one of the things which was going to be a challenge, because from legacy products where you're trying to claim equivalence from the areas of technical, biological and clinical performance, the MDR now almost requires you to have the technical documentation of the competitor where you're claiming equivalence of, which makes it almost impossible to claim equivalence. That's a big, very, very big challenge and a major, major change that took place. Common specifications, wider scope of regulated medical devices. The rules changed. We had 18 before, now we've got 22 rules. Unannounced factory audits, post-market surveillance, much more rigorous than it ever has been before. Traceability, which is what Craig's been talking about identification, traceability, UDI, UDMED is obviously one of the big factors. And then increased notified body authority involvement, which before there has been, but now they're even much more stringent. So even when they're reviewing a lot of the technical documentation for the audits, it's a very, very full-on audits that's taking place, and with it's a lot of difficulty that manufacturers are receiving the certificates, where it was already quite difficult with the old medical device directors and IVD directors, but now it's even much more challenging. And you've also got the requirement of the PRRC, Article 15, person responsible for regulatory compliance. And in my own experience, that's been a big challenge for some organizations where they've never had anybody assigned. But the MDCG guidance documents is available for Article 15, and it points the prerequisites of what a small, medium enterprise is, where you can reach out to consultants to, like, they can become your PRRC, and that requires, I think it's it has to be less than 50 employees and a turnover of, I can't remember what the turnover is, but it's fixed by turnover and number of employees. So that then becomes difficult. So therefore, you've got to then ensure that you've got resources available that will be capable to comply with Article 15 for the person responsible for regulatory compliance, which is a bit like being a qualified person in the drug pharmaceutical industry. So there's all these challenges that have come through, and these are all the new challenges that we're facing, aside from all the political discussions that we're discussing. So these are kind of full-on technical challenges that manufacturers have to be prepared for when they're undergoing these changes. But don't let it put you off. Just get moving on it if you haven't already.
Absolutely.
Great
I think that's
advice.
the most important thing, isn't it? It's just sometimes it's just making a start and running that gap analysis to know, okay, this is what I've currently got, this is what we can leverage, and this is where we need to be on our journey to get, you know, to achieve those objectives. You know, and some things we'll be able to use, some things might need updating because, you know, we've still got the harmonized standards coming in. I think the last update of those was around 17th of May. So these are slowly, and there's quite a number of these that need to come through. And once they get published, then that's great because you've got, you know, such conformity, which is fantastic. But they are taking a while again to percolate through the system. I think from a practical point of view, as in addition, like for the engineering side, in addition to the harmonized standards sort of making their way through slowly, and thank goodness we've got the 13485 through now, we've got the 14971 for risk management. Still waiting on some of the others, which are like general standards and some are product specific. But one of the things that we've found is labeling. It can be really taxing to implement all the labeling changes because they're so much more specific now. They're relatively straightforward to go through, but actually implementing them even down to like the real estate that you have on the physical packaging as well, to actually put all of that information on there. And that's before we started looking at what languages are going to be involved for the various member states and what their requirements are for translations as well. So, because that can sometimes be a little bit of an unplanned incident in the development pathway. So yeah, it takes quite a bit of resources to get that stuff done.
Yeah, I have definitely experienced that when I used to work more in MDR. The real estate can really just throw a wrench in things. So I can definitely appreciate that obstacle. We have about 5 more minutes left, so I want to pull in some of the questions from the audience. And one of them I know that has kind of been a hot topic is can anyone speak about the newly introduced definition of state of the art and how it may be applied to investigational devices?
Not me.
In terms of investigation, well, regardless of the device type, whether it's investigational or not, I would certainly say first off, make sure that you are, you know, you're running your regulatory matrix and you're identifying the new harmonized standards that are out there in the product standards as well, because they do change. Yeah, I've experienced it firsthand before where manufacturers getting ready for a notified body audit and we thought everything was, you know, they were ready, and then you check and it's like, oh, actually, you're not even meeting the product standard. So we don't, you know, once we actually did a gap analysis, we realized like, yeah, that has been updated and currently this product doesn't comply. So making sure that you're engaging with the right partner to identify what the current standards are, if they exist. So both generally in terms of the device type, classification, categorization, and then the technology. So you've got your horizontal and your vertical standards there, as understanding what that looks like and making sure that you're citing the latest versions of those. Is probably going to be one of my main suggestions.
Yeah, that's very good, Laurie. So just in addition to that, the other thing that I would also say is that when you've got investigational devices, just make sure that you're looking at technology that's comparable to what you're looking to launch or develop, and also to ensure that what you're using, you're looking at literature reviews, literature searches that you're doing. The literature that's out there is also got to be state of the art that you're looking at. It is the technology that you're comparing it against if you are doing a comparative device. Investigational devices can be quite challenging to say the least, but state of the art is a term that's often got bandied about without a very clear definition. And it's been interpreted in different ways. And I think there might even be a definition in ISO 14971 for state of the art. It's worthwhile having a look at that definition. But there is more and more discussion on state of the art. But the latest technology, and when you're looking at devices, it's also worthwhile having a look at the peer literature review when you're doing that comparison, if you are.
Awesome. All right, so let's pull in some other ones. Is there any news from the Commission about harmonizing procedure regarding MDR Article 97? It seems like it's kind of a temporary solution for many of the MDD certified products. Now we
Go on.
can.
Who's got Article 97 in front of them?
Yeah, I don't think I've quite memorized all the articles yet, but maybe one day. We can maybe circle back to that one later. Another question is there a similar database in the EU that's similar to FDA's MOD database? I would assume it's UDMED, but someone please correct me if there's a better answer.
I think the intention is for it to be UDMED once it's fully available. That is the intention. Eventually. I mean, the promises that we've got for UDMED, as Laurie said earlier on, the dates have been pushed around so much.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember. I think it's been years, since they were first talking about the launch of UDMED, which sounded a fantastic idea because we don't have anything like the MOD database. And the MOD database is fantastic. The FDA, there's a lot of information that you can find from there. Hopefully, touch wood, once UDMED is there and is all bells and whistles, we'll have something that's comparable. But that should be the database.
Yep.
And the goal should be in the second quarter of 2024 that is fully functional.
Oui, je suis d'accord. But I have a statement to make. Yeah. At the end of the day, for each of our clients and each of the manufacturers out there, it's the commercial impact that they need to concentrate on. Not FDA was the FDA gooded was fine, yeah, but they didn't check the data set, etc., etc., etc. UDMED is going to have a direct impact on revenue. So, regardless of different questions about this date or that date or this date, etc., etc., I believe personally, companies need to be looking at, for example, companies going to Medica this year. They're investing tens of thousands of euros in a product launch or product support. Regardless of what the law says, they're looking to defend or increase their revenues. And that should be the forefront of what we're providing, is to ensure that they don't have a material negative impact by not being compliant in advance of whatever subsection of the law is required.
Yep. Awesome. Thank you for that, Craig. All right. Well, with that, it looks like we're at time. So we really appreciate you all taking the time to join us. This is the last session of today. Tune in tomorrow for another great day of panels and presentations from your favorite industry experts. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Gerard.
much.
Bye.
Bye.